Good morning. My name is Dr. Pamela Thomas. I work for the CMC at IHLS. And this morning, Sherry Schuler-Faust is going to present to be a series or not to be a series. So go ahead, Sherry.
Okay, I'm hoping you're seeing my screen.
You are really quiet. You might want to turn your volume up. Yes, I am seeing your screen.
Okay, let me see if I know how to turn my volume up. Is it better now?
No.
Well, let's see. I don't really know how to do that now that how about now?
No.
Well, darn it.
Can everybody else hear her okay? If so, that's fine.
Can you hear me better now?
No, it sounds worse.
Well, then what's going on with this thing? I think I can't see my volume on my computer, so I'm going to have to stop sharing so I can change my volume.
Other people say they can hear you all right, so maybe it's just me. I'll just turn mine up.
It didn't work. Okay, well, I turned up my volume on my thing.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you fine now. I turned mine up too.
Oh, well, maybe it was you all the time.
All right, who just coughed?
Okay.
Who's not muted?
Okay. Anyway, so my name is Sherry Schuler-Faust, and today I'm going to be presenting webinar or whatever on series, to be a series or not to be a series. That's the question. So the things that will be covered is basically what is a series, the definition of a series statement, and the series title page, the two different types of series, author title series and title series, and then these strange little things called series-like phrases. So this is the definition of a series. It came from the RDA toolkit. In their definitions, and a series is basically just separate items that are related to one another that bear a title that's similar, and sometimes that title has different different titles within it, and sometimes it has numbering and things like that. So in the series statement, you sometimes find a series statement in the book that you're cataloging, and sometimes the series statement may include numbering. It's important to note that series information that is recorded in the 8XX field needs to match the authority record, and we'll talk about these things in a few minutes. And the information that is recorded in the mark tag 490 is transcribed from the item. So basically, in your record, the mark coding would be a 490 is a transcribed field, and the 8XX field is taken from an authority record. So those are the two things to remember. We'll be talking about those in a few minutes. So there's a thing called a series title page, and this series title page, it might be in the front of your book before the actual title page. It could be after the actual title page, or sometimes you might even find it on the back of the book or somewhere else in the book. But and not everyone, unfortunately, not every time do we see a series title page, but those are very nice if you do see them. So this is just a slide about the mark coding of series. Excuse me, my mouth's getting dry. So like I said before, the 490, the first indicator 1, that's called a trace series if it's got the 1 in there, and that is actually transcribed directly from the item. Another 490 that you may see is a 490 first indicator 0, and that's not a trace series. And when you have a 490, that is generally just taken from the authority record, whatever the authority record says. So then in your 8XX, There's several things that you can have. You can have an 8001, which is an author title series, and you use the 1XX in the authority record plus any numbering that you may find in the authority record to make that field. Other ones that you could possibly have, which are not very common at all, would be an 810, and that would be a second indicator 2, because that's for a firm or corporation. And then also you could have an 811 second indicator 2, and that's for a conference. And those two are pretty rare, but they do happen. And all that is taken directly from the authority record and whatever is in the 1XX. And then you also have an 830, which is called title series, and that is directly taken from the 1XX as well. Occasionally in some older records, you may see a 440, mark tag 440, and that is an obsolete field. So if you do come across a 440 in your record, whether it be in OCLC or your own database, you would want to enhance that record to the new mark tags of 490 and 8XX. So we're going to look at this book. We think it might be an author title series. On the cover of the book, we're looking at the book for Tunnels of Blood, and it says continuing the best-selling saga of Darren Shan. So that looks like it could possibly be a series, but we're not going to just stop there. We're going to keep looking at the book. So on the title page, you're kind of getting a little stronger that this is probably a series, but then you're like, well, okay, is our series Cirque du Freak, or is our series the Saga of Darren Shan? Is our series the Saga of Darren Shan Cirque du Freak? It's kind of hard to tell on this. So we're going to look a little bit further into our book. And wow, we come across a series title page. This is the coup de grace of anything that you have. This tells you that the series is the Saga of Darren Shan. And it also, in this particular series title page, it gives you all the titles that are actually in this series. So you can see by looking at this, Tunnels of Blood is not the last book, which would make it more sense that it would show all 12, but the one we're looking at is like a paperback book of something that was published before, so it already knew all the names in the series. So this is wonderful when you get this. So this is what our bib record is going to look like for this series. It is a trace series, and which we'll look at in a few minutes. But in our 490, we're going to have 490 first indicator 1, Saga of Darren Shan, because that's what was in the on the book. We transcribed that. And then in our 8XX, we're going to have an 800 first indicator 1, the author's name, and then the series title, and that is coming exactly from the 1XX in our series authority record. So this is an example of, well, this is the authority record that's in the Library of Congress, and you can see here in the 100 you have what we're going to put in our 8XX, and then in the 645 we're going to see a T, and that T means it's a trace series. You can kind of stop looking there. Once you see that T in the 645, you know it's a trace series, and then you know to use what is in the 1XX in your authority record. Another thing that's important in this authority record is the mark tag 642, which is the tag that we use for numbering, and that tells you exactly how to put the numbering in your MARC record. So in this case, we're going to put BK and then the number. So we're not going to spell out book, we're not going to put volume, we're not going to just put a number, we're actually going to put BK period and then whatever number book we have. If you look at your fix field, in the series, it has a B, which shows that it is a multi-part volume series. And then in the SER-NUM series numbering, it says A, which means that there's numbering. So that corresponds with your 642. So you know it has numbering, and then the 642 tells you how to number the book. I'd also like to say here that the Library of Congress was making series authority records, which are abbreviated SARs, and I'll probably use SAR a bit in this conversation. But as of June 1st of 2006, the Library of Congress decided to stop creating and updating SARs and to not provide controlled series access points in their records. However, the PCC participants are adding and correcting SARs to the Library of Congress catalog. Because of this new rule, you may find some records that are coded 490 first indicator 0. So if you do come across records like that, you should definitely check the authority file to see if an actual SAR has been established by the PCC. And if it has, then you want to change the 490 first indicator 0 to 490 first indicator 1, and then have the 8XX, whatever it may be, whether it's an author title series or just a title series. So you definitely want to always take a look at when you have a 490 in a record to check to see if there is an authority record for that. Excuse me. So this is a copy of the record in OCLC, and you'll notice that the 490 is recorded how it was in the book, and then your 8XX is recorded how it appeared in the authority record. And in this case, since it told us in the 642 to write BK period whatever the number is, we wrote BK period 3 as opposed to spelling out book, because the authority record says we use that abbreviation. The next thing we're going to look at is a title series. The title of this book, which is Do You Really Want to Visit a Coral Reef? That doesn't necessarily say shout out the series to me. So when I look at the back of the book, it doesn't really shout out series, but it's given me a clue that it could possibly be a series, because all the books start out, do you really want to visit blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of like, well, this could be a series and could not be a series, but I'm really not totally sure. So in this case, I'm going to look at the CIP, and that's what this illustration is, the CIP. It's a little bit hard to read, but I've got circled in the CIP. It says, do you really want to visit ... And we really shouldn't necessarily use CIP information, since it's to base your decision on, because the CIP information is a preliminary look at the contents of the book prior to publication. But with all the other information that we've gathered from the front of the book, the back of the book, and now this, I think the cataloger decided, yes, I think this was meant to be a series, so I'm going to make a series authority record for this, an SAR. And after I did some further investigation of this series, it turns out that there are indeed 14 titles in this series, and of these 14 titles, they were written by 2 different authors, which is why they made this series a title series as opposed to an author title series, because there's 2 authors. So who would you put as the main author? You couldn't make that decision, so you make this just a title series. So the mark tagging for this is in the 490. Do you really want to visit with the question mark? And the reason they put the dash is because that there's something else after that. And then the 830 would be the same way as the authority record was. So it's, do you really want to visit ... question mark? And this is a copy of the authority record, just so you can see it. So the 130 has, do you really want to visit ... This is the way the cataloger decided to do the series tracing, and it does have the 645 with the T in it to tell you that it's a trace series. And then when you look at the series numbering, it has a B, and that B stands for not numbered, or no numbering in it. So, and you also notice that in your record there's no 642 to tell you how to number this. So this is a title series, but there is no numbering on it. If there was numbering, you would definitely have the 642, and the series number in the fixed field would have an A, and you would just follow whatever is in the 642. So this is just a copy of the MARC record in OCLC, and you see that in the 830 it has, do you really want to visit, with the second indicator of 0 following the same, the 1XX in the authority record. So we have, within these two series, we have something called a qualified series, and we have an unqualified series. So there are many instances when an SAR has been qualified for a specific publisher or a specific place or something like that. That's usually because the series title is generic enough that they need a way to distinguish this series from another series. So when you have a series that's been qualified to a specific publisher or place, you can only use that SAR for the item that you have. So if I have a book in hand that says, I'm looking at the authority record, the qualified one by publisher on the left-hand side. So if I have a book in hand that says early reader, but my early reader is published by Scholastic, I cannot use this authority record, the one on the left that says early reader, Gareth Stevens Publishing, because this authority record only is for books that are published, oh, my thing just disappeared. Oh, books that are published that are only published by Gareth Stevens. If I had early reader by another publisher, I need to look for a different authority record, or perhaps that particular book is not in a series. Now looking at the book the record on the right-hand side, the unqualified series, it's sort of like the opposite of this. So I have a book with a series on it that says beginning chapter books, and the book that I have is published by Scholastic Books. But in our record, it tells us that the publisher in the 373 is published by Rourke Educational Media. I can still use this record because it does hit the 130 is not qualified by anything. So it doesn't matter who my publisher is, I can still use this authority record. I hope that's clear. So I did put some examples on the bottom of if I have an early reader by Garth Stevens. So your authority record, your bib record in your 8XX is going to be exactly what's in the 1XX. So in the case on the left for the Gareth Stevenson Publishing, my 830 is going to actually also have Gareth Stevens Publishing. My 490 does not, because in a 490 you don't put qualifying information in a 490. Then for the unqualified, I'm just going to have it the way that we always thought of it, as just beginning chapter books, which my 830 is, beginning chapter books, regardless of who my publisher is. So now we have come to the series not traced. Series not traced to me is very confusing of all the series authority records. So my question is, why put something on the item that is not meant to become a traceable entity? And why make an SAR for monographic series as shown in the fixed field series A? It doesn't make sense to me at all. So anyway, this particular record, if you look at the 645, that's where I told you to always go look first. And if you have a T, you've got it. You've got a trace series. You want to put that in your record as a 490 8XX. In this particular case, in your 645, you have an N, which means the series is not traced. Makes no sense. Why make a record for something that's not traced? But they do. And basically, you do not trace a series. And when you trace a series, that's adding that 8XX to it. So in your bib record, for a non-trace series, you're just going to have a 490, first indicator 0, second indicator blank, with what is in the 1XX. And you don't go any further. That's all you have in your record. So then we come across things that are also confusing. Those are series-like phrases. And to me, this definition is a bit nebulous, but however, the concept's nebulous as well. Series-like phrases do not necessarily enhance the collection and are not considered a bibliographic resource. However, a series-like phrase authority record may be created as a memo to the cataloger so that the phrase doesn't need to be investigated time after time with the same decision being made, or worse yet, make it inconsistent. So we're going to look at a couple examples. We're going to look at Pinnacle True Crime and the Deborah Knott mystery. So looking at the authority record for Pinnacle True Crime, and you see this phrase in your book, you're not to consider the phrase to be a series, either an author title or title. However, you can note the phrase in a 500 note. So this SAR gives us some additional information. It does say that this covers all instances when this character string used by any publisher is to be considered a series-like phrase. If a character string is considered to be a series, then a separate SAR will be made. So just off the top of my head, an example, maybe there is some books that are published by somebody else that they made kind of like an undifferentiated series, and it was like Pinnacle True Crime in parentheses Scholastic book. So if you have a Scholastic book, that would be Pinnacle True Crime, that they wanted to trace that series, they would have made another authority record. So you always have to look to see if there's an authority record made for Pinnacle True Crime that more completely matches the book that you have. And that's maybe not a great example, but the one that came up on the top of my head. So in this case, since they tell you to give the phrase as a quoted note, you would just put in 500 Pinnacle True Crime and then wherever you saw that. And most of the time I do think those are probably on the spine of your book. So another one that comes up, and this is probably a little more rare, but it does come up, where you have no note and they want you to record what looks like a series as a fictional character based on what the authority record is for that fictional character. So in this case, the 677 gives you direction on what to do. It says, do not include as a series or a quoted note access to fictional characters via subject headings. So for this particular one, it's telling us to go look in the authority record, in the name authority record for not comma Deborah. So when we do that, we go look at the authority record for not comma Deborah, and this is one of those new fictional character authority records where they've actually put it in the name authority as opposed to the subject authority. So there was an authority record for not comma Deborah with the subfield C, fictitious character. So this is what you would put in your bibliographic record. You would not put a note that says a Deborah Knott mystery. You would not have that really anywhere. You would just trace her name, and that is what brings all these books together. Okay, so there's also something in these that series-like phrases that says an undifferentiated phrase. So an I can't say that word very well. Undifferentiated phrase record covers all instances when this character string used by a publisher is considered to be a series-like phrase. If character string is going to be a series, separate SAR has been made. So the same thing like we had with the Pinnacle True Crime, it's just telling you that this phrase can be anywhere and this is how you record it. So you would give it as a quoted note. Oops, sorry. So this, I just put this slide in just to show you how crazy some of these SARs can be. In this particular one, we have several 645s, and another tag that we really didn't discuss before but kind of correlates with this is the 644. And the 644 is a tag that tells you whether it's been analyzed or not. So in this case, it was analyzed, and it wasn't analyzed, and then it is analyzed. It's just like in the 645, it was a trace, then it wasn't a trace, and now it is a trace. So it just goes back and forth, back and forth. And this one's giving you the dates of when it was first traced, and then it wasn't traced from February 16th, 1955 to February 2nd of 1998. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell you why. I'm just assuming that something changed with the way this thing was published, and they just didn't have a chance to analyze it. So those were like lost periods of time, I guess. And so they decide, well, we're not going to trace this because we really don't know what's going on with this book. And then finally, after February 2nd of 1998, they got around to actually analyzing it. So they said, oh yeah, this is going to be a trace series. I know that every system is different, but I think in my opinion, I would probably just go ahead and no matter what, I would just trace this series because obviously it should be a trace series. But that would be up to the cataloger to decide and how you want this in your system. So that's the end of my presentation. These are the resources that I used for this presentation. The series training for the PCC participants is actually, if you're actually going to become a person who could make series authority records, and join the PCC for that. And I think it was 12 sessions in total, but the information I took was just from session 5 and session 12. And so thank you very much for attending this presentation. On the call with me, besides myself, is Ian Anderson, Shelley Stone, Vince Andrzejewski, Edie Elliott, Erin Rose, and Dr. Pamela Thomas. So at this time, please remember to complete your evaluation form in L2 under My Events. And at this time, we'll entertain any questions about series. And if we have time after that, we will be happy to answer any regular cataloging questions.
Hey, Sherry, this is Dr. Pamela Thomas. I actually have a question.
Okay.
Okay. It's a little long, so bear with me.
Okay.
Okay, so if you don't have an SAR for a series title, but the series title is on the book, and say it's like volume 3, how do you code the 490? Do you do an indicator 0 or a 1? And do you also create the 8XX?
Okay. Here's my opinion on that. And it's because since LC is no longer making series, it's a little bit open.
Okay.
So my opinion on that is if you have book 3, I would definitely put in the 490 first indicator 1 with what's on my book, and then make an 8XX according to the book. That I would do that on the book. If I only had book 1, to me that's a whole different ballgame, because the way I was taught is you have to at least have 3.
Okay.
Which makes sense because in cataloging everything was 3s, right?
Right. Yeah.
So if I only had book 1, I would either I would probably put it in a 490 first indicator 0 with that.
Okay.
Maybe what I would do, it depends on the book and what I think is going to happen.
Okay.
Or what I could do is just put in a 500 note.
Okay.
And the reason I say that on book 1, you really don't know if that person's going to continue with this series or not. You don't know even if maybe the series will continue, but you don't know if 1 or 2 more authors are going to write it. So I'd be reluctant to put an 8XX in something that I only had book 1, and kind of even book 2, but that's given me a little bit more leeway to go ahead, assurance to put it in. But by book 3, you know, I hope that I hope we've got a solid series. Not that it can't change, but, you know, but that's sort of, and that, I think that's kind of, well, I'm going back way back when that was sort of like cast in stone that you had to have 3, and that sort of loosened up a bit after the 2005. So it's kind of like, you know, catalogers' choice on what they want to do, but that's how I look at it.
Okay. And did you say it was 2005 when LC stopped creating the SARs?
I think it was 2005, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Sorry, guys. You're like, no, I have great questions to ask. So remember, if you have a question, either type it in the chat box, and if you don't have your chat box open, just kind of wiggle your mouse around, and you should see the chat box down at the bottom. Or if you're brave, you can unmute yourself and ask your question and then mute yourself again after it's been asked. Okay, we've got a question from Robert. You may have answered this, but I lost my sound. Is it permissible to add just an 8XX series statement when the series statement does not appear on the resource, such as an audiobook recording with no series statement, but you can find an established series statement for the print resource, or the author's website contains a series statement for a series of books in print?
I would say nowadays, yes. Like what I said before, back in the day, we would have put that in brackets because it didn't appear on our item, but I don't think they use brackets anymore. And I think because in RDA, you can take the information from any source.
Yes.
So I would say, yes, I would put it on the, you especially do see that on audiobooks, and I feel like you also see that a lot on large print where they don't necessarily add the series on it. But
so would you just have the 8XX and not the?
No, you'd have to have
the 490. Okay, thank you. I thought that,
yeah.
All right. Okay, does anybody else have any questions about series?
I think series can be really difficult now with the fact that they're not being made, the SARs are not being made as readily as they were. I can tell you that in the share in IHLS, we do come across, I do make a lot of local series for people. And then maybe 4 or 5 months down the road, a series has actually been put into OCLC. So then I have to, bring in the OCLC one and delete ours and stuff. But it's sometimes, I think series are kind of difficult to know what you actually have.
Yes, and I think that's a very important part of your bib record. So it makes me sad that LC is not creating them anymore. Okay, so Don just says, thanks, this was helpful. So does anybody else have any series? Okay, Kathleen says, I think our Brady needs the answer typed in reference to lost sound. Summary answer was yes, 8XX plus 490. Yes, Kathleen, yes. So if you have an 8XX, you have to have a 490, right?
Yes, you can't just have an
8XX without the 490.
An 8XX is your access point. Your 490 is just sort of, for lack of a note sort of thing. It's not a note field, but it's sort of like telling you that there's a series, look for a trace something, unless it's a 490 first indicator 0. Yeah. You can't have an 8XX without a 490, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, and the 440 used to be a more important field, I would say. Yeah, before it became obsolete.
Yeah, the 440, if you had a 440, that meant that you've had an authority record, that you saw an authority record.
Right.
Yeah.
But then they changed that.
Yeah.
Thanks, cataloging gods.
Yeah.
Okay, Linda says, I was not able to join audio until about halfway through. Where can I find the record of the session? Thank you, Linda. We always put the recordings on L2, and if you have registered in L2, I also send the link in the email. Hopefully the link to the recording will be available early next week. We do not have the power to do that, so someone else has to do the editing and give us the link. So be patient, but it will be on there, and then you can listen at your own convenience.
And I'd like to add, Linda, that we also, once we get the recording, we also put that on our website that
Yes.
you can go to it from there as well.
And we have the slides up on L2 now, and will you put your slides with your notes after
Yes.
this? And
Yes.
so Sherry will post your slides with the notes on L2 after the webinar is over. So you can read along as you're listening. Okay. You are welcome, Linda. Does anybody else have any questions about series? If not, then we'll open it up for just some general cataloging. And remember, you can unmute yourself if you are in an environment where it's relatively quiet to ask your question, and then mute yourself again after you've asked your question. Kathleen says, for those who can't hear, link to full audio will be sent by email later and posted on website. Thank you, Kathleen. Okay, so no more questions about series or series titles. What about some general cataloging questions? Nothing. Remember, next month we're going to be talking about subject analysis. I will be doing the presentation on that. So if you haven't had the chance to register, please do so. And then in November, we'll be talking about cataloging kits. And then in December, Sherry, you're going to talk about
foreign languages.
Foreign languages. Thank you. Oh, I am laughing because RSA just posted a webinar in Braille would be helpful. This is why I'm laughing. So one of our libraries just received a donation of 400 to 450 Braille only books. So we are going to start cataloging those. So yeah, we could do a webinar on Braille after we learn how to do that. Because I have never cataloged a Braille book. So thank you. That's a great suggestion.
And if anyone has any suggestions on how to read Braille when there's no English there, we would all like that.
Some helpful tips. So RSA says, that was Rhonda's suggestion. Thank you. That would be helpful for us too, because we have older Braille records in need of improvement. Okay. Yes, because I know there are certain fields that we want to have in our bib records. So I know that's important. Okay, does anybody have any questions about series, general cataloging questions, or just future topics for us to cover? Okay, Robert says sometimes, hang on, a 500 note is enough. A 490 may not be needed when using just an 8XX. On bib formats and standards, an 830 field is usually justified by a series statement, field 490, or a general note, field 500, relating to the series. For reproductions cataloged under AACR2, it may be justified by a series statement in field 533, reproduction note, subfield F. So Robert is saying that you don't have to have a 490, that a 500 is enough.
Well, I don't know why you would put why you wouldn't put a 490 if you're putting in a 500. That to me doesn't make any sense, but if they say it's okay, it's okay. I think it's interesting about the 533, none of that truly makes a lot of sense to me. I'd have to look in bib formats, because if it's in a 533 reproduction note and you have a reproduction of something, why doesn't your reproduction also belong in the series?
Right.
Yeah, so I think I'd have to read that to further understand exactly what that's all saying.
And I learned that you always have to have a 490 with an 8XX.
Mm-hmm.
Kathleen says you might check with public schools which provide Braille transcription services to students. Yes, thank you. Then Robert put a 490 is a series statement as it appears on the resource, but if the resource has no series statement, then a 500 note is used. Okay. And then Dina says the Illinois School for the Visually Impaired in Jacksonville might be able to help with the Braille items. Okay. And then Shelley says, I think the 490 is always supposed to be the way it is shown on the item. If it isn't on the item, maybe that explains why you could use a 500 instead. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, maybe because since you can't use brackets anymore.
Right.
I'd still be reluctant to use a 500 and would probably use a 490
without the
because you can't, because you can take it from anything
too, right? I mean,
well, you could, but to me that's
too much. It's duplicating.
Duplicating information. But
okay, yeah, I will probably just always still do the 490 and the 8XX. I'm sorry, Robert.
Yeah, I agree with you, Pam. But it's nice to know that, you know, whichever way you decide to go, you're not wrong.
But you can have a 490 without an 8XX, is that right?
A 490.
Yes, okay. And would you also have a 500 or no?
You can definitely have a 500 without an 8XX.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, does anybody else have any questions or statements about the series or just general cataloging questions? I've had some really good information sharing and questions. So Janet says, so can you have an 8XX with a 490?
No.
That's also good to know.
Yeah, 490 is for things that are not traced, and the 8XX is your access point, and that's your tracing. And if it's a series isn't traced, you would not ever have an 8XX because it's not traced. They don't want you to put that. That's why I think they're kind of weird. Why make something and then say, but don't really put it in your record, but you know, it doesn't.
But you can put it in this field, but not in this one, right? Isn't that what they're saying? Yeah.
Basically, it's not that we don't want to really tie this all together, so to speak, because you can't. A 490 isn't searchable, so we're not really tying these together. So if you're going to make it, why not just trace it? It doesn't make sense, but. Oh, well.
Okay, so Janet says, okay, that's what I thought, but got confused by something that was said before. That's probably something I said, Janet. I'm sorry, because I get confused by series. Trying to get it clear in my brain. Okay, any other questions? Series related or just general cataloging? Janet says, I think we all do. Well, I think it happened when they stopped creating or actively creating the SARs, so. Okay, so any other questions? Shelley says some databases don't trace things correctly. I think the 490 is searchable in share even though it isn't supposed to be searchable. Okay, that makes sense too. Thanks,
covering
Shelley.
all the bases.
Well, and sometimes we don't have control about what the library databases do and don't do. Sometimes we do, but not always. Sometimes those vendors decide for us what they're going to do. RSA says, do you know if SARs will be created again by LC in the bib frame environment?
I kind of doubt it, but I don't know.
It seems like the more ARs, the better with linked data. I agree, but yeah, I doubt if they're going to start up again, but who knows?
I don't even know why they stopped other than just time consuming, I guess, but
maybe the employees.
yeah, I don't know.
RSA says, okay, thank you. I was hopeful. As are we all.
Mhm.
Okay, Robert says, Janet, I think a 490 must be changed to 491 if there is 8XX. Yes.
Yes.
That is correct.
Yes. Yeah, I would say because of the fact that the Library of Congress is no longer making SARs, but they are putting 490 in records if they suspect if something is a series,
okay.
that a series title record SAR is made for it, and people add the 8XX but forget to change the 490 to 1, which so you may see it,
sure.
but you just need to make sure that you correct the record correctly.
Okay, so we need to, if we see a 490 and an 8XX, then we need to edit that record to a 490.
Well, you need to make sure that, yeah, you need to make sure that really that is that the 8XX truly does have an SAR to match it. And if it does, then fix the record to make the 490 first indicator 1.
Okay, so do your due diligence and make sure that it's a real series.
Yes.
Traced.
Yes.
I'm learning. Okay. Any other questions or information you want to share? Or just general cataloging questions? I'm not seeing anything. So I just want to thank everybody for attending, and remember, we'll be sending the link out hopefully early next week. And then you can listen to that. RSA says, how do you display the series in the OPAC, 490, 8XX, or both? I think that depends on your
that's
on your
based
ILS, right?
Yeah. I mean, we do both, the 490 and the
Cher does both. Okay, yeah. She says, I was wondering what Cher does.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I'm not the one to answer that. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. Displayed in the OPAC.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Edie, do you know the answer to that one? She's trying to get her
to look up.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to unmute.
Yep.
I don't think we do.
Okay, you don't think?
You think we just display the 8XX?
8XX.
I would have to check that.
Okay.
There's a difference between displaying and making it searchable.
Right.
So that's what I'm not sure for
I don't
us,
know.
which one we do. Shelley, do you know? To find an example.
She says she's not sure either.
Yeah.
So RSA, sorry.
We'll get back with you.
A good answer.
We'll get back with you about that. I'll look. She said that's okay. So you were just asking if it displays.
Yeah, Shelley said it was searchable. The 490 was searchable.
Well,
but as far as it displaying in the pack, I would almost logically think no, but
yeah, but
I don't know.
If it's searchable, you'd think it would display, right?
Well, searchable would just be whether or not it would bring all the items together in your search, not whether it displays in the short view or the long. When you open up the longer view, I don't know if it displays.
Yeah, I don't know either.
To me, it would seem that it wouldn't.
Okay.
Because I remember the discussion long ago when they went from the 440 to the 498X, and it's like, well, it's going to show up twice, and it's confusing, you know. So I would think that you would maybe suppress one in your display. that would just be my logical thinking.
Okay. See, my logical thinking thinks it should be the other way around. Okay, so Robert says in share in the public view, the 8XX field displays not the 490, but
Yeah,
both are searchable.
That's
okay.
what makes sense to me.
Thanks, Robert.
Yeah. Thanks for checking, Robert.
You are welcome. RSA. So anybody else have any other questions or information they want to share, topics they would like us to cover in the future?
Besides Braille?
I have to learn it first, and then I'll be happy to share that with others. But remember, that could be database cleanup, RSA. Something the CMC does. Okay, well, I just want to thank Sherry for presenting on series titles, and you're all glad that I wasn't the one because I am confused by them. Okay, and remember next month we will do subject analysis, and we'll be sending the link out hopefully early next week for those of you who lost some audio. So thank you guys. See you next month, hopefully.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Lynn says, thank you, terrific as always. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.